Welcome, dear friends, to part 14 of exploring the advent of divine justice. And without any further ado, we'll have our opening prayer. Thank you.
Abdu'l Bahá, ای بنده حق، دست شکرانه به درگاه خداوند یگانه بلند ما و بگو ای بها جان، جانم به فدایت، ای دلبر نازنینم، ای یار مهربانم، عنایتی فرما که در ملکوت ابهایت با روحی روشن و وجدانی چون گلزار و چمن راه یابم و در خدمت امرت کوشم و جان در رهت افشانم و خاک ره احبایت گردم انک انت الکریم الرحیم عبدالبها عباس.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Simin Jan. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Everyone into the room. Perfect. So, dear friends, we're going to be starting paragraphs 51 and 52 today in the Advent of Divine Justice. And if you have this text here, it starts on page 50. And if you have this text, it starts on the page 28. And of course, I'll have the book, the text will be coming up in front of your screen. So, dear friends, I will share my screen with you so we can start our lesson for today. Okay, really happy and excited. This is going to be wonderful. Okay, so dear friends, this is the topics that we'll be covering in part 14. This of covering paragraphs 51 through 52. We'll be covering the challenge of racial prejudice, as well as the history of race. Where did this idea of race come from? We'll also be touching on slavery and racism. Just touching on it, getting a feel for the oppression that is slavery and racism, because these are topics that are so massive that I just wanted to highlight on slavery and racism. And lastly, in paragraph 52, the beloved guardian contrasts and gives the example of the model of Abdu'l Bahá. And so we'll be now focusing in our last part on the model of Abdu'l Bahá, because the beloved guardian highlights it in paragraph 52. Okay, so that is the topics that will be covered in this section. So let us have our first reader, okay? And our first reader will be Roya Jan. You will be our first reader for tonight.
Paragraph 51. As to racial prejudice, the corrosion of which for well nigh a century has bitten into the fiber and attacked the whole social structure of American society, it should be regarded as constituting the most vital and challenging issue confronting the Baha'i community at the present stage of its evolution. The ceaseless exertions which this issue of paramount importance calls for, the sacrifices it must impose, the care and vigilance it demands, the moral courage and fortitude it requires, the tact and sympathy it necessitates, invest this problem, which the American believers are still far from having satisfactorily resolved, with an urgency and importance that cannot be overestimated. White and Negro, high and low, young and old, whether newly converted to the faith or not, all who stand identified with it must participate in, lend their assistance, each according to his or her capacity, experience, and opportunities, to the common task of fulfilling the instructions, realizing the hopes, and following the example of Abdu'l Bahá. Whether colored or non-colored, neither race has the right or can conscientiously claim to be regarded as absolved from such an obligation, as having realized such hopes or having faithfully followed such an example. A long and thorny road beset with pitfalls still remains untraveled, both by the white and the Negro exponents of the redeeming faith of Baha'u'llah. On the distance they cover and the manner in which they travel that road must depend to an extent which few among them can imagine. The operation of those intangible influences which are indispensable to the spiritual triumph of the American believers and the material success of their newly launched enterprise.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Royajan. Very well read.
Welcome. Thank you.
Okay. And Miss Darla, if you could please read this one. Thank you.
Paragraph 52. Let them call to mind fearlessly and determinedly the example and conduct of Abdu'l Bahá while in their midst. Let them remember his courage, his genuine love, his informal and indiscriminating fellowship, his contempt for and impatience of criticism, tempered by his tact and wisdom. Let them revive and perpetuate the memory of those unforgettable and historic episodes and occasions on which he so strikingly demonstrated his keen sense of justice, his spontaneous sympathy for the downtrodden, his ever-abiding sense of the oneness of the human race, his overflowing love for its members, and his displeasure with those who dare to flout his wishes, to deride his methods, to challenge his principles, or to nullify his acts.
Thank you, Miss Darla. So these are the two paragraphs that will be discussed in this section. So quite a lot in paragraph 51, talking and directly addressing racial prejudice. I'm just going to touch on a few extracts that are just so profoundly powerful. And that also, if you recall earlier, the beloved guardian in earlier paragraphs said that as to the freedom from racial prejudices is directly addressing us all. And so again, here, again, the beloved guardian in paragraph 51, he says, white and Negro, high and low, young and old, whether newly converted to the faith or not, all who stand identified with it must participate in and lend their assistance, each according to his or her capacity, experience, and opportunities, to the common task of fulfilling the instructions, realizing the hopes, and fulfilling the example of Abdu'l Bahá. Again, the beloved guardian stressing, it is on everyone, this duty, to work to the eradication and freedom from racial prejudices within the Baha'i community. So this comes up for the second time, addressing everyone. Now, again, yes, did someone say something? Okay, so then another interesting point I'm going to share with you in this paragraph. What an incredible statement starting at the very end. A long and thorny road. What imagery, right? A long and thorny road beset what? With pitfalls, still remains untraveled. So when was this written, anyone? December 25th, 1938, right? December 25th, 1938. So have we already traveled this long and thorny road? Who knows? Who knows? And I think there's still a long and thorny road ahead of us, because this is a long and thorny road. It's, you know, if we have already traversed it, then it wouldn't be that long. So this is going to be with us. And what does the beloved guardian say? That he says, on the distance they cover and the manner in which they travel that road must depend, to an extent which few among them can imagine, the operation of those intangible influences which are indispensable to the spiritual triumph of the American believers and the material success of their newly launched enterprise. So it's how much you put in, dear friends, is going to be how much you get out. How much effort do you put into the sacrifices? How much effort are you putting into working individually towards the eradication of prejudices within your community, within yourself? And then you'll see that effect in the greater society. So these are things that really stand out in this paragraph to me. And obviously, at the very beginning, it says, this is constituting what? The most vital and challenging issue confronting the Baha'i community at the present state and of its evolution. So it's not talking about the general community, the Baha'i community. This is the most vital and challenging issue. So this is the most predominant issue that we have to address in our community, is racial prejudice. So we're going to be getting into it in far greater detail. And then in paragraph 52, then the beloved guardian, on contrast, places the example of His Holiness Abdu'l Bahá. So loving, so beautiful. And he gives the example of Abdu'l Bahá, and he puts up forth several phrases here. Fearless, determinedly, his conduct, his courage, his genuine love, right? His informal and indiscriminating fellowship, his contempt for and impatience of criticism, tempered by his tact and wisdom. So these are on contrast to the spirit of racism that is that each one of us should be opposing. So we have to look to the example of Abdu'l Bahá, his keen sense of justice. And then what is this? Is so beautiful. It says, let them revive and perpetuate the memory of those unforgettable and historic episodes and occasions on which he so strikingly demonstrated his keen sense of justice, his spontaneous sympathy for the downtrodden, his ever-abiding sense of the oneness of the human race, and his overflowing love for its members, and his displeasure with those who dare to flout his wishes, to deride his methods, to challenge his principles, or to nullify his acts. So, dear friends, we should constantly study, bring his example before our eyes so that we have that example of how we can take on racism, because he truly is our exemplar. So, without any further ado, let us start now getting into exploring the introduction, major points, and then go into full-on study. So let us have Mahnaz John. You are up. Yes, you are our first reader. Go for it.
Introduction, paragraph 51 to 52. The beloved guardian addresses the issues of race and racial relationships in the American Baha'i community. The concept of race and its historical background is first studied. It is shown that the term race, meaning a nation or a group of people with common descent, was first used between the 16th and 19th centuries. In the mid-19th century, race acquired its contemporary meaning of categorizing people according to their color, ethnicity, and origin was used as a political to promote
Sorry, Mahnaz John, we lost you. To promote hate and cultural animosity.
I think my internet is not very good.
Oh, no, you did great. That was
Yeah.
excellent reading. Excellent reading. Thank you very much. Okay, so this is our brief introduction on the origin of race. So let us get into some of these major key points. So racial prejudice is referred to as the most vital and challenging issue confronting the American Baha'i community. The modern concept of race assumes that a race can be characterized by a biological foundation. So this is, if you've seen any of these forms, it says, what race are you, right? And so they're basing it on characterizing it on this biological foundation. And we're going to be exploring this fallacy of what race is as we explore this. Ancient cultures gave more importance to family or tribal affiliation than race. And just letting everyone into the room. Okay, and our next reader is going to be Miss Yuda Miller. You're up. You're muted, dear Yuda.
Okay. Major key points from paragraph 51 and 52. In the Middle Ages, a combination of ancient beliefs and the Bible description of human origin formed the dominant view on race. The subject of race emerged as a field of study during European expeditions when an explorer discovered very different groups of people living in different continents. Houston Stewart Chamberlain moved the topic of race to the political domain when he argued that Christianity, ancient Greek philosophy, and art all emerged from the Aryan race. Chamberlain's view formed the underlying intellectual framework for the 20th century German anti-Semitism and the crimes committed by Adolf Hitler and the Nazis.
Thank you so much. A similar intellectual framework of racial prejudice against African Americans and American Indians developed in the United States. The historical reason for slavery was economic, but in modern times and in some countries such as the United States, biological racism has been used to justify slavery. And lastly, we'll talk about the talks of and behavior of His Holiness Abdu'l Bahá while traveling in North America can be used as a model in dealing with racial prejudice. So these are, dear friends, are the major key points that we'll be addressing from the paragraphs 51 through 52. Any thoughts so far? Are we good? Good. Okay, so let us get into it. This is going to be a great session. Very excited. So in paragraph 51, dear friends, the beloved guardian asserts that the corrosion, this is an incredible word, corrosion of racial prejudice for well nigh a century has bitten into the fiber and attacked the whole structure of American society. The beloved guardian, Shaykh Effendi, considers racial prejudice as what? The most vital and challenging issue confronting the American Baha'i community. And this vital issue requires the attention of the whole community to fulfill the instructions given by Abdu'l Bahá on this matter, to realize his hopes and to follow him as an example. Any thoughts on this one? Very strict.
This is Hoda, may I?
Please, Hoda, go for it.
Yes, the most has bitten into the moral fiber and attacked the whole structure of the American society. And it's true, 80 years later, since it was written in 1938.
Right.
And this constitutes the most vital and challenging issue. When I think of vital, I think of everything depends on life is vital. Without vitality, you're dead. Vital organs that if they're compromised, you're dead. Vital, if it's in any way, shape, or form compromised in terms of one's life, in terms of job, housing, education, healthcare, criminal justice system, the prison industrial complex, all that. It's vital and it affects the lives of the marginalized community in the United States, the historical population, as the House of Justice refers to, in every area of their lives. Is the racism dims the vitality of life for people of African descent. And I can only think this challenging. I've just recently been thinking about the two terms that the Guardian, the sign of God on earth, uses. These two terms, vital and challenging. And I think challenging because it is so challenging for a non-person of African descent who comes to the United States, such as an immigrant, such as myself, to even consider it impacting my life. Because everything in American society, there's two Americas, one for whites, one for blacks. And there's two Americas, separate, unequal, and hostile. So it's challenging because I really have to make it a constant effort to make it the watchword of my life. How am I thinking? What am I doing? How am I in my interactions with people of African descent or indigenous people? How am I carrying myself? And I have the privilege of not even thinking about my ethnicity or the color of my skin because I am not a person of African descent. So I think this most vital and challenging issue challenged so much for non-African Americans, because we can choose not to even think about it or consider it because we so much benefit from everything the way America is set up, at a great benefit to people of European American extraction and a great loss and detriment to people of African descent.
Thank you, Hoda Jan. Very true, very true. So in the end of paragraph 51, this quote extract comes again. A long and thorny road, beset with pitfalls, still remains untraveled, both by the white and the Negro exponents of the redeeming faith of Baha'u'llah. So this is going to be a long and thorny road, dear friends, and it still remains untraveled. So, dear friends, let's explore this. The term race, meaning a nation or a group of people with common descent, was first used during the 16th to the 19th century. In the mid-19th century, race acquired its contemporary meaning of categorizing people according to their color, ethnicity, and origin, and was used as a political to promote hate and cultural animosity. And such views influenced major political crises in the early 20th century, such as the rise of anti-Semitism in Germany and institutionalized racism in the United States and apartheid in South Africa. So we're going to get really into the origins of race in the forthcoming slides. But the modern concept of race, and this is from the race document that comes from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and this is published in 2017, is categorized under 5 assumptions. So when you fill out that form, what race am I, it's based upon 5 assumptions. And this is the modern concept of race. So the first assumption is a race is characterized by a biological foundation, whether consisting of Aristotelian essences or modern genes, okay? Now, assumption 2, discrete racial groupings that share the same biological characteristics form a racial group. The third assumption, the biological characteristics of each racial group are passed from one generation to the next, allowing the race of an individual to be classified through ancestry. And the fourth assumption is a study of genealogy should determine the geographic origin of a race, typically in Africa, Europe, Asia, or North and South America. And the fifth assumption, based upon the modern concept of race, is this one. The biological characteristics manifest themselves in physical phenotypes such as skin color, eye shape, hair, texture, and bone structure, and behavioral phenotypes such as intelligence or delinquency. So this is what modern concept of race is based upon. Now we're going to see where did this idea come from, and we're going to see that this entire notion of race is a complete fallacy. So the concept of race has been proven a myth, as I just mentioned, and has been challenged scientifically and philosophically since the World War II. In particular, genetic discoveries have shown that genes do not identify the ethnic roots of an individual, and there are no specific genes associated exclusively with one cultural group. So this is so important, dear friends, in the scientific world to disprove this notion of these classes and groupings of humanity, calling this race. And in the course Creating Communities of Oneness that we had over the weekend, I had over 20 extracts from the writings of Baha'u'llah to the writings of Abdu'l Bahá, showing that we are one, that there is this aspect of there is no such thing as race, no such thing as race, but there is racism. Racism has been created, but there is no such thing as race. And so this concept of race is a complete myth. So now let us get into some more readings, my dear friends. So let us get to our next quote. And our next reader is Miss Jenny. You're up, Miss Jenny. Go for it.
Okay. History of race. While ancient cultures were conscious of physical variations in humans, much more importance was given to family or tribal affiliation than race. In ancient Greece and Rome, human diversity was believed to be caused by environmental factors, such as climate and geographical location. For example, Hippocrates of Cos.
Hippocrates.
Okay.
There you go.
Hippocrates of Cos, a Greek physician, believed that the physical form and inherent qualities of people were determined by environmental factors dominant in the region in which they lived.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So in ancient Greece and Rome, human diversity was believed to be just caused by environmental factors. This aspect of skin color and race was not an issue, it was just environmental factors. The first recorded attempt at systematic grouping of humans was made in Egypt. In the Book of Gates, an ancient Egyptian funerary text dating to the New Kingdom, different cultural groups known to Egyptians were divided into the 4 categories of Reth, which is the Egyptians, Amu, which is the Asiatics, the Themahu, the Libyans, and the Nehesu, the Nubians, based on both physical and geographical characteristics. So this is the first time in recorded history, written down, that humanity was grouped into different groupings. And so this was a depiction of this, and you can see it on the right. It says the 4 races of the world, and you see them there. Then, in the Middle Ages, a combination of ancient beliefs and the Bible description of human origin formed the dominant view on race. According to the Babylonian Talmud, humanity descended from the 3 sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, resulting in the 3 distinct groups of Semitic, Asiatic people, the Hamitic, the African people, and the Japhetic, the Indo-European people. This reflected monogenesis concept of race, maintaining that all humans descended from a common ancestor. The modern race concepts assert that human races descended from different ancestors, a theory known as polygenesis. So there's the 2 differing ideologies of the origin of humanity. One is polygenesis, one is monogenesis. And so this is monogenesis, that we have a modern common ancestor. And so this one is a story in the book of Genesis that I can share that story. It was one of the, when Noah had fallen asleep and his sons were left to look after on the ark, look after the animals and tend. When he awoke, he found one of his sons, namely Ham, had been, according to the story, had been drinking, and then the one that was Shem was the one that was blessed and was the good son, and then the one that was Japheth, he was okay. He wasn't either good, he wasn't either bad. And so this was the story, okay? And so they said in the story, it says, and he said, blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. So this was in the story of biblically, that this was the father of the white Caucasoid race. And Ham, which was the father of the black Negroid race, and he said, cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall be unto his brethren. So he shall be put into slavery, a servant of the servants. And then Japheth, the father of the Oriental Mongoloid race, God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. So he will be also a servant of Shem. He will dwell in the tents of Shem. Okay, so this was a story to show that obedience to the manifestation, that, you know, when the manifestation says do something, you do it. And so with everything comes punishment. So this was just an example, but what happened, it created division within that. And so this created biblical proof, and that humanity should be divided based upon races.
So this origin is originally set by Lord in the Genesis?
This is in the book of Genesis. Yes, this is in the book of Genesis.
So that means it is already set from the very beginning.
This was, but also remember, dear Tesfaya, there's a thing called humanity's interpretation of the writings. So this was an example given by the Lord to show obedience to the Lord. That when the Lord, when Noah said, you know, watch and tend to the animals that were on the ark. So one of them, Shem, was paying attention. Ham went and got drunk, you know, and drinking the wine. And then Japheth, he really wasn't doing good. He really wasn't doing bad. He was the okay son, you know, he was not doing better. So the example was do good. But what happened was, over time, they said Shem is the good one. So he benefited, and he is the representative of the Caucasoid race. And Ham he was bad. And so just like the colors that have been depicted, white is always depicted as good, black is depicted as bad, and Japheth was the in-between, which is, you know, the colors in between. So you see, this is how it has been over time interpreted by humanity. But it was an example, an illustration for education of humanity to the obedience of these divine teachers. So that's really it was. James, you have a hand, please.
Yeah, sure. How do they come to be considered the fathers of these races?
Oh, yes, great question. So how did Shem, Ham, and Japheth come to be the fathers of these races? I have far more on it, but let's see if Dr. Bayat or Dr. Satibait have an answer more in depth on this than I could, because I have written documents on it. Either Dr. Bayat, do you have any thoughts on this yourselves? Let's see.
Ehsan Jan.
Yes, please, Dr. Bayat, please.
All of these are stories, and none of them should be taken as facts. They're not history, they're stories, as you said, for some reason, some purposes is served by these, but we shouldn't go by them. Abdu'l Bahá, even on the subject of creation, Adam and Eve and all of that says, if a child today reads these stories, going to find them funny. It's even for a child, they are funny. So we shouldn't really spend a lot of time on these. It's good to know that it's there, and it's good to know that for centuries, people use these as a basis for thinking, but they're really not true. In fact, the book of Genesis and the Old Testament is more to do with the history of the Jewish people. It doesn't really deal with the rest of the world's history because they were not aware of it.
Right.
So that's all I would like to say. Anything beyond that would run me into trouble. Thank you.
Excellent point. Thank you, Dr. Bahá. Excellent point. So, but I wanted to share this because this was a major grounds for Christian invasions and Christian this idea of superiority. And you can see even the illustration by James Tissot, 1904. So you see, even in 1904, this was the basis of that they were using this as the illustration of where is the white Caucasoid? They're the blessed ones. But where is the Negroid race? They're the cursed ones. So you see this superiority, they were basing it upon supposed biblical story. You see that? So that's why I wanted to include that. So you have that as a reference point.
Exogen, in fact, the Book of Mormon, which is Genesis, is mid-1800 or early 1800s, still refers to the black race as the cursed. So this was a very strong view for the Christians.
That's correct, Dr.
It remains so, unfortunately. Yes, but we have to really go beyond it completely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, moving on. So the subject of race emerged as a field of study during European expeditions when explorers discovered very different groups of people living in different continents. In 1684, Francois Bernier introduced the first articulation of race in a new division of the earth based on his visits to Egypt, Persia, and India. He grouped humans into 4 race types, or even possibly 5, if American Indians were considered, of people who were so different that they could serve as the basis of a new division of the earth. So this was the first scientific classification of humanity, was now Francois Bernier. Prior, it was the Egyptians, they were the first one ever doing it, but this is now the first scientific classification, was in 1684 by this guy, Francois Bernier, with really amazing hair. So, okay, so let us, and this is his book. I actually found a copy of his book. This is Travels in the Mughal Empire. Okay, then later.
And his hair is not real.
I know, Dejan, I know. So in 1779, then this Carl Linnaeus, you may have heard about him in your biology classes, but this guy called Carl Linnaeus, in the May 23rd, 1707 to January 1778, that was his lifespan. He was a Swedish botanist, physician, and zoologist. He organized humans into now 6 species of man, and they were not equal. So these are the classifications. There was Homo americanus, Homo europaeus, Homo asiatics, Homo afer, which is American, European, Asian, and African. And then Homo monstrosus. And this is the monstrous, including the giants and the dwarves. What a terrible last category, imagine. And then Homo ferens, which are the wild men. Homo ferens characteristics were mutus, tetrapus, and hirsutus. These are the mutes and moving on all fours, and hairy. His classification was primarily based on geographic location and skin color, though he identified for each race some subjective attributes based on the temperaments of ancient Greek philosophy. So this guy truly was one of the major protagonists in the creation of race and the ideology, because he was a very scientific person. He was a physician, he was a zoologist, he was a botanist, so he had now, and he was also classifying humanity into different groupings. And he's, even if you open up your biology book, you will find this guy, because he is of that caliber historically in the history of botany and zoology. And so he's one of the major players in historically, but he also categorized humanity into these 6 groupings, which...
Hey, Ethan,
Please, dear, testify.
how about Homo sapiens?
Oh, that comes a lot later, dear testify, a lot later. So,
Okay.
So yes, so that is what we are. We are just one species, Homo sapiens. There is no division, there is no subgroupings. We are just Homo sapiens. So all of these other groupings are all man-made for the purpose of one group being superior to another. So
May I say something here,
please, Mother John.
Ehsan?
Yes, please, of course.
First of all, I really want to thank you for this in-depth explanation, because we really, Abdu'l Bahá says, seek the realities underlying the oneness of humanity and discover the source of fellowship which will unite humanity in a heavenly bond of love. So we really need to know if we are all children of one loving creator, and all of humanity comes from the same source. What were the scientific and social reasons for the humanity, for the family of humanity to be divided against itself? And you really are taking the time to explain how the truth became distorted and became a lie. Because up until, the 16th century, as say different populations such as the Egyptians and Vikings, as you said earlier, as they were conquering different lands and different people, as they have done from the beginning of time, different people conquering different kinds of people, and it was never based on any kind of ethnicity or biologically. It was mainly tribal, like you said. But it was only until the 16th century when the Europeans started trying to conquer different lands, and because they were in competition with each other. Right. The Belgians and the Dutch and the French and the English and the Germans, they all tried to take a piece of this world and call it their own, and stake their, plant their stake and claim it their own. And based on that, in order for them to increase their financial prowess and to be able to, one up each other, they developed the sciences, and the scientists at the time also, like you said, Carolus Linnaeus, they developed this man-made because they had an agenda. There was a reason. It was all for financial reasons. And up until the 16th century, the tame race never existed. Like you said, it started in the writings of French and Spanish writers. Not discovery. Countries already existed, huge human populations with great capacity, with great precision, with great historical background. They were already there. So it's not the age of discovery, it was the age of invasion. Thank you.
No, absolutely great point, dear Holy John. This was the age of conquest, the age of invasion. The from the British to the Portuguese to the Spanish to all of these countries were now invading country after country after country. And so this is the scientists, so-called scientists, these are the best scientists at those days, now were justifying the conquests, and they were justifying superiority of one group over another. So this is why they could say, we are conquesting you because we are superior. So we are doing you a favor, you know? And then they also had the Bible, you know, which we just showed, as a justification of, you know, doing these kind of activities. So this is what they were doing in a sense of, we're doing you a favor. We're bringing not only, you know, the holy book to you, we're bringing also our technology, our sciences, our arts, everything to you, because you are classified as homo ferens, you're wild men. You're classified as homo monstrosus. You're classified as subhuman in that sense. So we're doing a favor to you. So this is what they were, the greatest scientists of those days were tasked to create. They were tasked to create racism. And this is what happened.
Listen, John.
Please, Dr. Bahá.
If you look at what scientists throughout the ages have done, and these are pretty intelligent individuals over the years, starting from the Greeks all the way now, they have used whatever sciences they had, and also they used the scriptures, whatever was available to them. Egyptians used what was available to them. The Christians and Jews, of course, used the Old Testament and so on. But what really changed is that Baha'u'llah came and put in a very different basis. Before Baha'u'llah, the basis was the appearance, height, skin color, hairstyle, things like that. Baha'u'llah completely put that aside and based it on the fact that we are all spiritual beings with material needs. So on the basis of a spiritual being, suddenly humanity is one. It's on the basis of a spiritual being that man and wife, man and woman are equal, and so on. So Baha'u'llah suddenly crossed all these science and pseudoscience and also religious beliefs of the past, put them away, and changed the basis for it. And the only reason why we're looking at it is out of curiosity, so that we understand why people divided humanity in these forms, and that was the only thing available to them. They didn't even know mankind had spirit.
But as we know, dear Dr. Bahá, science and religion go hand in hand. So the aspect of science has proven that humanity is one, that the genetic aspect is one. And as faith, as you said correctly, Baha'u'llah has proclaimed the oneness of humanity. So there we go. Science and faith and religion go hand in hand. So there's a principle that you're talking about, which we're going to go into far greater detail in part 15 when we go into the Baha'i viewpoint on racism. This section, we're really just getting into the history of race as it is.
That's correct. We understand how we arrived where we were before Baha'u'llah arrived. Yes, sir.
Exactly. Thank you, Dr. Bahá. Okay, so then another one of these promoters of racism emerged. And this one was, as they say, a very terrible one. And this one, his name is Johann Friedrich Blumenbach. And in 1795, he was a German naturalist. And he was a very famous individual and still is to this day. He grouped humanity into 5 races. He divided the human species into 5 groups and later founded on cranial research description of human skulls, and he called them from 1793 to 1795. And so these 5 groups are the Caucasian or the white race. And Blumenbach was the first to use this term for the people of European, Middle Eastern, and North African region, believing the people of the Caucasus were the most beautiful of the world. So he was the first to put this hierarchy also, was Blumenbach. So he said Caucasian is the most beautiful. Then the Mongoloid or Mongolian or yellow race, including all East Asians and some Central Asians. Then below, the Malayan or brown race, including Southeast Asian and Pacific Islanders. Then the Ethiopian or black race, including Sub-Saharan and Africans. And the fifth, the American or red race, including American Indians. And Blumenbach argued that physical characteristics like skin color, cranial profile depended on geography, diet, and mannerism. And at the bottom, you could see those were actually his drawings of the skulls of each of the 5 races. So the black, the red, the yellow, and the brown. So they, each one of these people did craniography, mapping of the skulls, and cranial research to determine the groupings, that classification of humanity. And this is Blumenbach. So he was not the only one. There was many of these individuals, and they drew humanity one after another. And then came along this guy, Samuel George Morton. So I'm going to get a reader on this one, Miss Deborah Burden, okay? So this guy is the father of scientific racism, and why he is so important and why I bring it into the presentation on Advent of Divine Justice is because this individual had such a major impact on racism in America, the ideology of what racism is in America. So this guy is one of the proponents of teaching racism. So that's why I put several slides to explain who this guy was. Please.
History of race, father of scientific racism. In the first half of the 19th century, one of America's most prominent scientists was a doctor named Samuel Morton. Morton lived in Philadelphia, and he collected skulls. In the 1830s and 1840s, American craniologist Samuel Morton collected and measured hundreds of human skulls in what he described as an attempt to compare the brain size of 5 human racial groups. Morton, a native Philadelphian, physician, and naturalist, recognized as the first physical anthropologist, began collecting human skulls in the early 1800s. Though he didn't travel much himself, his role as president of the Academy of Natural Sciences afforded him the opportunity to correspond with scientists around the world to secure samples.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Deborah. Okay, and our next reader is going to be, ready? Dawn, you are our next reader. Go for it.
History of Race, father of scientific racism. He aimed to gather sufficient numbers from each of the 5 racial groups he recognized: Ethiopian or African, Native American, Caucasian, Malay, and Mongolian. In total, he amassed around 900 skulls, the largest academic collection at the time, and one that remained so for half a century after his death. Today, the Morton collection is stored and curated in the Physical Anthropology section of the Penn Museum. Initially, Morton measured the size of 256 skulls by pouring white pepper seed into each cavity, then gauging in cubic inches the volume of seed needed to fill a sample. From that work, he published Crania America in 1839, which reported statistics from every Native American skull and averages for the other groups. The next year, he published the first of 3 skull categories, and then a book called Crania Egyptiaca.
Huh?
I don't know what that means. And the second catalog came in 1844. 1844, I know that date.
Yes. So the Crania Egyptiaca is the Egypt one. So there's the Crania America, and then there was the Crania Egyptiaca. So these are different publications. So he's pouring this type of seed, this white seed, into the cavities of the skulls. And the more seeds that go into the skulls, you would say there's more capacity of brain matter and brain size in the skulls. So this is what he was basing the cleverness or the intelligence or capacity of humanity. And then, so we're going to see how this is broken down. It's very interesting. That's why I put this together, to show you this is one of the main originators of racism and how it happened, okay? So Morton wasn't choosy about his suppliers. He accepted skulls, he scavenged from battlefields and snatched from catacombs. And one of his most famous craniums belonged to an Irishman who'd been sent as a convict to Tasmania and ultimately hanged for killing and eating other convicts. With each skull, Morton performed the same procedure. He stuffed it with pepper seeds. Later, he switched to lead shot, which he then decanted to ascertain the volume of the brain case. Morton believed that people could be divided into 5 races, and that these represented separate acts of creation. The races had distinct characters, which corresponded to their place in a divinely determined hierarchy. Morton's craniometry showed he claimed that whites or Caucasians were the most intelligent of the races. East Asians, Morton used the term Mongolian, though ingenious and susceptible of cultivation, were one step down. Next came Southeast Asians, followed by Native Americans, and Blacks or Ethiopians were at the bottom. In the decades before the Civil War, Morton's ideas were quickly taken up by the defenders of slavery. So this guy set the basis for slavery in the southern United States. The scientific proof of slavery. So
is that the way how to measure the intelligence of human brain?
Yes. So he was trying to say that one group is more intelligent based upon cranial capacity. And so in my slides, even his methodology has been studied, and we're going to see this, and we're going to see how it is a complete fallacy. So I've spent time to study it and show it, and you'll see it coming up, dear Tesfaye.
Can I say something?
Please, of course, Miss Yuda.
Well, since we are on the topic of skulls, the Leakeys discovered the oldest skull in Kenya, Africa, and it dates back some millions of years. And it is believed that the human race started in Africa and then dispersed throughout the world through land bridges, and at any rate, and then people say 60,000 years ago, there was only one race, and that was the Negro race. And all the other races descended from it. And well, that's about all I have to say.
You're absolutely right, dear Yuda. There is only one humanity, and that we're all from the African origin. You're spot on. And our common ancestors are coming from Africa, and millions, as you said, more than 1 million years ago, our ancestors were coming from Africa. And as you said, back then there were land bridges, there was frozen connections connecting one continent to another. And so based upon dispersion of humanity from one area to another, these environmental factors have changed us from one group being very dark and one group being very light over thousands of years. And this is melanin, that melanin protects us from the radiation of the sun. So this is just a protection against UV light. So if you are in a very sunny areas of the planet with high density of UV radiation in the tropical areas, your skin will become darker in over thousands of years. This is a fact. And so if you could take, science has proven that if you take someone who is as the whitest of skins and take them to sub-Saharan Africa, you over thousands of years will become as dark as the darkest of dark. And if you can take someone of the darkest of dark and take them to, the very north climates where the whitest of white, they will also change to the whitest of white. And it's just based upon the melanin of the skin. It is an adaptation to the environment. So this is scientifically proven, and this is in myriads of journals talking about, and also obviously His Holiness Abdu'l Bahá addresses this also, and I can share those extracts. They will be shared in part 15 when we get into the Baha'i viewpoint on racism. So, but you're spot on, dear Yuda. Very good insight. Thank you. So moving on. So these are the actual skulls that are part of the Penn Museum. So and you can see these are from the 5 races that this Samuel Morton, the father of scientific racism, he classified. Okay. But what happened? So let's explore this just a hair further. So Morton claimed in this great publication, very historical publication, groundbreaking at the time, called Crania Americana, that the Caucasians had the biggest brains, and they were averaging 87 cubic inches, and the Indians were in the middle with an average of 82 cubic inches, and Negroes had the smallest brains with an average of 78 cubic inches. So then Morton believed that the skulls of each race were so different that a wise creator from the beginning had created each race and positioned them in separate homelands to dwell in. So then he published in Philadelphia in 1839, Morton divided mankind into these 5 races, linking the character of each race to the skull configuration. In a claim typical of the developing racial sciences, Morton wrote of Native Americans that the structure of his mind appears to be different from that of the white man. And within a few years, Crania Americana had been read in Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and India. And James Cowles Pritchard, the founding father of British anthropology, described it as exemplary, whilst Charles Darwin considered Morton an authority on the subject of race. Later in the 19th century, other European scholars produced imitations with titles including Crania Britannica and Crania Germanica. So this guy was a major proponent and authority as the father of scientific racism in the modern times.
My theory is that Morton's idea was a whole load of hot peppercorns and nothing else, just nonsense. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you, Dr. Satyabayat, as you say. We'll actually get into what absolute nonsense it was. And another anthropologist studied his work and explains it a little bit better than what Dr. Satyabayat said, and explains it why he came up with these numbers. And so it's very interesting, and I want to share this with you because it goes to the point of what the beloved guardian talks about when he says inherent superiority, right? So this is and it's a non-Baha'i friend that says this, and he says this person has inherent superiority. So now this is again, he says Samuel Morton, had a lot of influence, particularly in the South, says Paul Wolfe Mitchell, an anthropologist at the University of Pennsylvania. When Morton died in 1851, the Charleston Medical Journal in South Carolina praised him for giving to the Negro his true position as an inferior race. Morton's skull measurements were used to justify the institution of chattel slavery in the United States. If Africans were not of the same species as Caucasians, then enslaving them was more easily explained and excused. Indeed, this belief supported the reasoning of Justice Roger B. Taney in the Dred Scott decision of 1857. And this Dred Scott decision was the US Supreme Court's ruling on March 6, 1857, that having lived in a free state and territory did not entitle a slaved person, Dred Scott, to his freedom. And in essence, the decision argued that as someone's property, Scott was not a citizen and could not sue in a federal court. So this Samuel Morton, as mentioned, he had a significant amount of influence, even after his death, in the southern United States of America, and even had an influence on the decisions of the Supreme Court. And so this was a major individual. So what happened? So I'm going to get into it even more. So let me check my time. We're still good on time. I just want to keep abreast on that. So our next reader is Miss Claudia. You're up, Miss Claudia. Go for it. Oh, you just muted yourself accidentally. There you go.
At nearly the same time across the world, German anatomist Friedrich Friedman was conducting similar research. The scientists produced nearly equivalent results, but what they inferred from those findings differed drastically. Friedman used to fight for equality and the abolition of slavery, and against the idea that different races were created separately. Morton's research was used to maintain the status quo in the United States, which at the time meant racial divisions, hierarchy, and slavery. Friedman was one of the first persons to scientifically contest racism. In his article entitled On the Brain of the Negro, compared with that of the European and the orangutan, 1836, he argued based on a craniometric and brain measures taken by him from Europeans and Black men from different parts of the world, that the then common European belief that Negroes have smaller brains and are thus intellectually inferior is scientifically unfounded and based merely on the prejudice of travelers and explorers.
So at the same time as this Samuel Morton, there was this Frederick Friedman, who was actually doing the same type of science, craniometry, to study brains, and he had a completely opposite conclusion. That he said that Negroes there's no basis that they have smaller brains. Absolutely no basis for this. And he said it's based upon prejudice. Now, this individual, he just passed away in 2002, bless his soul, Stephen Jay Gould, an incredible American paleontologist evolutionary biologist and historian of science. And he was one of the most influential and widely read authors of popular science of his generation. And in 1978, this American scientist, Stephen Jay Gould, wrote several texts about scientific racism. And I've read several of these. And the idea that scientific findings might justify continued discrimination and intolerance. And was interesting, he used Morton's skull studies as a prime example. And this is what he writes. Gould notices that the average for the Africans between the seed measurements and shot measurements increases a lot. But the average for the measurements of the Caucasians only increases a little, about the same amount that the measures for the Native Americans do. Mitchell says this leads Gould to conclude that Morton was unconsciously underestimating brain size for the Africans. So this is what his conclusion was in his paper, that he was unconsciously packing the seeds in. So this is very interesting. Because of the seeds' compressible nature, Gould suggested skulls could be inadvertently overstuffed or lightly packed, producing inaccurate numbers. Morton had unconsciously done so. Gould surmised packing seeds into Caucasian skulls and only lightly filling African skulls, leading to systematic underestimations of African cranial capacity. Do you follow this? This is very interesting.
Yeah.
So he was overpacking the Caucasian skulls and underpacking he was overpacking the Caucasian skulls and underpacking the African skulls. So this created this disparity, and this great American paleontologist discovered this, and he published it, and said this was an unconscious racist act that he was doing, and this is this inherent act of superiority. You follow? This is Stephen Jay Gould. He was not a Baha'i, but he noticed that this was an inherent act of superiority that was going on. Okay, so that was pretty interesting. I wanted to share that with the class so you get this feeling and understanding of the history. So then there was several more major players that historically created this action of this terminology of race and mapping of the different groups. And one of them was Charles Pickering. So I'm going to get Gabrielle McGuire to read. Go for it, Gabrielle.
Charles Pickering, November 10, 1805 to March 17, 1878, was an American race scientist and naturalist. Pickering believed that each race had been separately created. He noted that anthropologists of his time often spoke of 3, 4, or 5 different races, but that thus far no way of representing their geographical distribution. In an attempt to rectify this, he joined an expedition in 1843 to travel to Africa and South Asia to conduct a study of races. Relying on oral histories and his own observations, 5 years later, he published his book, The Races of Men and Their Geographical Distribution, in which he declared he had seen all of the 11 races.
So this is Charles Pickering. And this is a map, and this is in the Modern Atlas, published 1835. And this is the explanation of the emblems on the map. I'm going to show you the map in a second, but you can see the state of civilization. On the left, it says savage, barbarous, half-civilized, civilized, then enlightened. So you could see the the lightest color is enlightened and the darkest color is savage. So this is how they would classify humanity in their maps. So this is the modern atlas of 1835, and it's map designating savage, barbarous, and enlightened regions of the world. And just serving it, just you can see the darker regions being in the Asia, the Africa, and then the Americas, and then Europe being the lighter colors. So that would be the enlightened colors. You see this? And so this is how they designated humanity being savage, barbarous, and then the enlightened regions of the world. And this was in 1835. And then the different races, and this is on the map, it shows Caucasian, Mongolian, American, Malay, and African, and then the religions from Christian to Greek to Catholics to Lutherans to other Protestants, Mohammedans, and pagans. So they're, got numerically how many people in every area. But these are the 5 races that they have put in their map. Then not only was Charles Pickering, doing a mapping of the world with his 11 different groups, many other individuals were also doing this simultaneously. And this is in 1850. This is drawn and engraved by John Emsley. It's a color engraving, and he was showing all the facial portraits of men from different parts of the world. And at the top it says Asiatics, then the Australians, the Europeans, the Polynesians, the Africans, and the Americans. So different categories of humanity. And again, another depictions, drawings, trying to put subgroups of races of humanity. And I put these together so you could see that how many of these people were doing this to show that there's all these things, so-called races. And again, this is the map. This is the map of Charles Pickering that we talked about, 11 races. So this is his official map that he drew, and you can see all the different colors on it. And in the middle, right under that, here, sorry, it's a really small font, but it shows the different 11 races. It's really small font. But that's the geographical distribution of the races of men. Hope everyone's enjoying this. This is educational, historical overview of the history of race. So we have a few more slides. Let me check the time. Yep, we're pretty good on time. We have 7 more minutes. So let's cover.
Can I just say something? It's going to be really short.
Please, please, of course.
It is so important. How does what you're saying, what you're sharing with us, what you're helping us understand is that there is no such thing as different races. Anthropologists who study human beings past and present officially stopped dividing people in 1948. Cultural anthropologists who study human beings past and present stopped dividing human beings officially in 1948. However, if you Google and go on your phone and Google how many races are there, it says 3, 4, 5, 8, 16, 2,000, 23,000, and so many multiples. If you yourself go ahead and you ask your friends, people that you meet at work, randomly, ask children, people that you know, community, which is what I always do. How many races are there? Very rarely do you hear one race. And we know that spiritually, Abdu'l Bahá says there's only one race, one progeny inhabiting the whole earth. And exactly at the time when all this fake science was being written, Abdu'l Bahá was at the cusp, the center point, the point of the arrow at the heart of humanity. And coming to America, well, Samuel Morton was just being accepted. And it's still this pseudoscience, this rubbish heap, is still accepted by majority people in the United States. 97% of children under the age of 15 believe that there's multiples of races. That's why we as Baha'is task of we have to learn this science, this pseudoscience, so we'll be able to dispel the myth of race and be able to clearly and perfectly dispel this false, so that we clearly can share the oneness of humanity, which is the pivotal principle of our faith. We can't just be, oh, there's only one race. Yes, there's only one race. Yes, we have the science of one race, but we are not treated as one. So I just wanted to kind of give more meaning to why we're doing this and how well we have to learn what you're sharing with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, this entire exercise, historical overview, the entire purpose of it is to show the fallacy of race. And so that we are one race, one humanity, and we have one common purpose, which is the ever advancing civilization. So this is just to show where this has come from. And in the prior, I had a slide showing these five breakdowns of what the origin of race is. It was in, so the five, I think it was, let me pull it back. I want to show you that really quick. Sorry, I just want to bring that really quick to in front of your eyes. Yes, right here. So these five assumptions, this is the common assumptions that race is based upon. So all of this history that we've been covering is now coming to these five assumptions, that these assumptions are based on biological foundation. Is it? Do we see a biological foundation? No. And then discrete racial groupings that share the same biological characteristics from a racial group. There aren't any. So all of this is a fallacy. The biological characteristics of each racial group are passed from one generation to the next. So these are the five assumptions that this modern concept of race is. And as dear Hodajan was saying, that this entire historical overview that I'm taking you through is where this has come from, this ideology of race. And where the beloved guardian is saying, this is the most vital and challenging issue confronting the American Baha'i community, is because it is so part and parcel of the American culture. This idea of race and racism is so part here that to separate it, from us, this ideology of race is just impossible now. We have to have a solid understanding of its origin. Where did it come from? Then we can, in our own heart, have certitude that saying, yes, Baha'u'llah said there is one humanity, but I also know historically that this entire thing is made up, and this is the history behind it. So this is, we have to have a solid knowledge to be able to prove this. So this is where I'm coming from. Thank you so much. So let me check our time. We have a few minutes. I just want let's finish this one last guy, and his name, this is another major player, and I want you guys to learn this guy tonight before we end tonight. So in English colonization and empire, this is the book, English Colonization and Empire, an 1891 book by the English philosopher Alfred Caldecott. In this work, Caldecott, whose interests included theology, psychology, and moral philosophy, tried to give an account of races in relation to the historical development of empires and colonialism, what he calls the diffusion of European civilization over the face of the inhabited and habitable world. Caldecott recognized that others had delineated a greater number of races, including Pickering's 11, but decided to boil down the differences to a number that he felt was suitable for ordinary use. See, now they were trying to use the number for, if you have too many number of races, then you cannot use that to your own benefit. You see, So he wanted to have a smaller number for the number to use for the benefit of the empire, colonialization. So Caldecott broke it down to a smaller number. Aryan, Mongol, Negro. He only had 3 races, and his point was to say that these are the races that matter. And then ethnographic map, and this is now another ethnographic map. Now we can see how many races this one has. This one has 1, 2, all the way to 12 races, okay? This has 12 races on it, and this is a diversity and distribution of human races in the 19th century by F. Mueller and O. Pascal. So other people had many more. Okay, let us close for tonight. Okay, we'll end on this slide. But dear friends, I hope you've enjoyed part 1 of our part 14 course covering the history and origins of the scientific racism and this fallacy of racism and fallacy of race. And so any questions at this point?
Thank you very much for your hard work digging all this and bringing to understand us. And then I am glad that the Baha'u'llah came and solve all these things, because the Lord is a solution. Otherwise, it will be a mess, the whole world.
For sure, my dear Tesfayed. It's really it's so exciting coming up to present this solution that the beloved guardian presents coming up, and it's such a wonderful part 15 and part 16 coming up. It's very exciting. So, this section is for me was very tough and very emotionally challenging to get all of these facts, to get all of these figures. And there were so many images that I came across that I didn't want to burden the friends and hearts and minds in this section, because there's just so much sadness to go along with race and racism that I didn't want to include the graphicness in the pictures, but I was very careful in my presentation to not to include those. But
thank you. This is a very good presentation. Very selective, beautiful.
But I encourage each one of you to study, read, because the more that we can study on race and racism, our knowledge base, we will be able to talk with authority and not only internally combat racism within ourselves, but combat racism within our communities. So we have to become knowledgeable on this subject so that, it will not just be, people such as these great scholars as Ibram Kendis of the world. It will be every Baha'i should be knowledgeable on this subject. Every Baha'i should be knowledgeable, you see? And then we could be able to start combating it within our communities. This is what I look forward to. And every one of my dear students in my class, I call upon you in your private time to become knowledgeable on this subject. Anyway, my dear friends, let us have a closing prayer. And
I've got one.
Yes. Oh, Don is always ready for this. And so let's have a closing prayer. And I say good night to each one of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Praise and gratitude. All praise, O my God, be to thee who art the source of all glory and majesty, of greatness and honor, of sovereignty and dominion, of loftiness and grace, of awe and power. Whomsoever thou willest, thou causest to draw nigh unto the most great cause, the most great ocean. And on whomsoever thou desirest, thou conferrest the honor of recognizing thy most ancient name. Of all who are in heaven and on earth, none can withstand the operation of thy sovereign will. From all eternity thou didst rule the entire creation, and thou wilt continue forevermore to exercise thy dominion over all created things. There is none other God but thee, the Almighty, the most exalted, the all-powerful, the all-wise.
Thank you, Don. Thank you to every one of you. Thank you for your patience, and look forward
Thank you, and
another
happy
wonderful
passing
class
for
session.
everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Good
Good
night.
night.
So much. Have a good night.
Good night.